use different words for those, right? So we could stay it, we could hold it in abeyance, we could the amendment could be something like amend and replace, or amend and suspend, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of options there. This is one of those areas where Multnomah County has authority because our Home Rule County Charter grants the Board of County Commissioners authority to legislate over matters of county concern. And here, this would be imposition of a tax to fund a program that would provide childcare, and that's a matter of county concern. So if we were to adopt universal preschool, then this board, as an ordinance, has its authority to take any action that it deems appropriate. And that's basically it in a nutshell. Are there any questions or additional information that would help this board in its decision making?
Thank you, Jenny. I'm going to go through and call on commissioners by district because I'm sure folks have questions, and I appreciate you giving us an overview of this unique situation that we find ourselves in. I'm going to start with Commissioner Stegman. Do you have questions for Jenny about the vote we're going to take today or about our options before us?
I do not. Thank you, Chair. Jenny, I wanted to thank you because we have had multiple briefings, emails, conversations. So I feel like I have a very good understanding of where we're at. And so I just want to thank you and thank Commissioner Vega-Pedersen, who I've had multiple questions, and they've both done a really great job of answering every question I had.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Vega-Pedersen.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions for Jenny, but Jenny, I just wanted to send a huge thank you to you and your team for all the work that you've done on what we have before us and all this work on preschool. It's been really great, and you've answered questions and you've helped organize things, and we just really, really appreciate you, the work that you've done in getting us to this point today.
Thank you. Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you. I don't have any questions either for similar reasons, but I also want to thank Jenny. Jenny, I know you've given us that information before, both in public and individually, but I do think it's important. It's been a complicated process, and I do think it's important that we run through it again for the folks who are watching or listening. So thank you.
And to the birthday woman, Commissioner Myron.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you. I also want to extend my appreciation to Jenny for answering and responding to numerous questions, as well as Commissioner Vega-Pedersen. Have deeply appreciated that. And though I don't necessarily have specific, I do have one question, but I do think it's important that this has been such a complicated process. It is so unprecedented. It is something as unprecedented means, we have not done this, what we are proposing today. And it's unusual. I think it's more important than ever that the public be aware of what a lot of those questions have been and how they have been responded to, because it's very complicated, and it took multiple briefings and multiple questions to sort of understand where we are today. I think I do finally understand that, but I do have one question. You'd mentioned that, Jenny, in county code, we have two choices: refer or adopt, and you mentioned that is straightforward. And I believe that is straightforward, and we do have two choices, which are refer or adopt. And in my mind, I feel adopt means to go through with enacting the ordinance, or we refer. I know there have been all kinds of conversations about how we can sort of get around the concept of adopt, meaning adopt, so that we can refer a single measure to the ballot. And you mentioned that once the board adopts the measure, it becomes an ordinance, and we have the authority to do what we feel is appropriate or necessary. So if we adopt it, it becomes an ordinance. Is it then something that we can do what I believe is being, we will be voting on? I'd like you to clarify what we're actually going to be voting on today. Because after a lot of conversation, we have narrowed it down out of those options that you have proposed. But if it is adopting an ordinance and then we suspend it or amend or do whatever, is it something we do to refer an adopted ordinance to voters? Are we considering amending it so that, depending on what happens with the preschool for all measure, that we will subsequently potentially refer an adopted ordinance then to the voters if preschool for all did not, for example, pass?
Thank you, Commissioner. So first of all, I clarify that right now we're just having a briefing about all the available options. This is not a voting item. The next item that will be before you is a first reading of an ordinance to adopt universal preschool. Because universal preschool imposes a tax, it requires 2 readings in order for it to be adopted. So first reading this week. If it passes as written, then it goes on to next week for a second reading and adoption. So that's the procedure. Once it's adopted, as we've discussed, it becomes a county ordinance. And then it is within the board's discretion to decide what, if anything, will happen with that adopted ordinance. I don't know specifically what the board's plan is. I know there's a lot of conversation, and I think that the board itself is in the best position to know what documents will actually go onto the board agenda. And so I would defer to Commissioner Vega Peterson or the chair or anyone else who has comments on. To my knowledge, no documents have been submitted to the board agenda, which would actually state what's going to happen after adoption.
Is there someone else, Jessica or Chair, that could answer that question? My understanding, and we can talk about it, I guess maybe it is, sorry for the confusion with the procedurally here with the briefing and then the voting item. Will the next conversation, when this comes onto when we're voting about the adoption, is that where these questions would be better addressed?
Just from my opinion, Commissioner Meyer, just from my opinion, and I don't know that there's a legal rationale why we would do it now or later, but it seems that since the next measure is actually the voting measure on a plan, that would be the time to ask. You can ask questions about what the larger plan is about the particular issue at hand. That's just my take on it.
All right, that's perfect. Thank you. I will ask those larger plan questions later. But Jenny, given you've laid out the options, have you sort of gone through an analysis of the risks or benefits of any of those options vis-a-vis the others? Like the risks of potential challenge, what risks there might be if challenged, of success, for those?
Yes, Commissioner, I have, of course, looked at whether or not there are legal risks associated with the board adopting and then either amending or repealing preschool for all. I've looked to the county charter, I've looked to the county code, and we've done a review of the case law in my office, as well as other actions which have happened throughout the state of Oregon. And I have not found any legal hook or legs on an argument that the Board of County Commissioners does not have authority to amend its own ordinances. In fact, in my opinion, the ability to legislate and then amend legislation as it goes forward is key and as a cornerstone to the Board of County Commissioners' legislative authority. So although there is always a possibility that someone may bring a lawsuit or may bring some other sort of legal challenge, challenging the board's authority, I feel very confident in defending any such claim and taking that forward and defending this board's ability to legislate and then to amend its own legislation.
And I get, sorry, I don't mean to belabor the point, but I absolutely understand and agree the ability to legislate and then amend. This is taking and refer, and we can do all of those things. I don't believe we necessarily should do all the things we can, but we can do those things. But once it's adopted, what we are doing is adopting it. Do we typically refer adopted tax ordinances to the ballot?
Oh,
if it's an ordinance that's been adopted.
Nothing's typical. Nothing's typical about this.
Typical. Has that ever been, I mean, to refer an ordinance that's been adopted seems even more atypical.
It does seem atypical, but it's not unprecedented. And in fact, our code at Chapter 5 anticipates that the board may directly refer to the voters an ordinance that has been adopted. We've seen it. We've seen it in other counties. It's certainly not typical because the board has authority and uses its discretion to exercise that authority. But I would posit that sometimes there are social issues or political issues where the Board of County Commissioners, although it could in the first instance adopt the legislation on its own, it chooses instead to seek the input of the people. Ironically, this Board of County Commissioners has authority to pass a tax without voter input at all. So, I mean, our authority in this area is very, very broad. In this instance, the Board of County Commissioners has opted to have the voters vote on preschool for all, and now we have universal preschool before us. So this is as you said, it's unprecedented. It is not typical. Passing taxes through either a board vote or through voter approval doesn't happen very often through Multnomah County. The last time was the iTax. So. And we've never had an initiative approved vote come through the Board of County Commissioners, to my knowledge. So everything about this is atypical.
Okay. Okay. All right. And there, but there's nothing atypical if we referred it to the ballot. Is that true? That would just be a straightforward referral.
It would be a straightforward referral, but it would also be the first time this Board of County Commissioners ever referred a tax to the voters through voter initiative. So hasn't happened before.
But it's an initiative petition.
Right. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I do have more questions that will come up in the next in the series. Thank you.
I'll be right here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Jenny. I think we've laid out the complexity of the situation that we are in, and now we will move on to R3. Unless I hear, I'm sorry, I should have asked, do any of the other commissioners have a question for Jenny at this time? All right, we'll move on now to R3. Marina?
R3, ordinance adopting Universal Preschool Now initiative petition.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Stegman moves, Commissioner Vega-Peterson seconds. Approval of R3. Commissioner Vega-Peterson, would you like to kick us off?
I would. Thank you, Chair. So I just want to start off by saying I think nothing comes easy in 2020. We all know this. We live it. And I would say that the efforts to give 3- and 4-year-olds in Multnomah County access to tuition-free, high-quality, culturally uplifting preschool have been no different. The work that we've done has entailed over 2 years of task force and specialized work group meetings. It has been, coalitions have been created, have been strengthened through this process. We've had engagement with parents and workers that has led to their involvement in policymaking that is just unprecedented. We've had multiple board briefings ourselves about implementation plans, options around referral, and supporter testimony. COVID, with a lack of face-to-face meetings and the budget uncertainty, have made it all the more difficult. And through it all, the Preschool for All and the Universal Preschool Now coalitions have engaged in hours of discussions and negotiations to come up with a plan for unification of our efforts. Because of this work, this board now has a chance to make things simpler. Several weeks ago, we heard from the chief petitioners and campaign manager for the Universal Preschool Now coalition about their desire to remove their proposed measure from the November 2020 ballot. Getting to a single measure will allow us to reduce confusion among voters, enable a unified coalition to unite behind one measure. It will eliminate a tax measure from an already crowded ballot, and it puts forth a proposal that recognizes the legitimate and deep and thorough community engagement in both the Universal Preschool Now and Preschool for All processes. That's why I'm putting forth this motion today, and if it passes, plan to put forward a motion to repeal the UPN measure upon passage on September 3rd. Of course, I want your input in this, and I think that's part of this discussion today. I will say that to date, my office hasn't received a single email or call voicing concern about this step, which has been written about in newspapers and publicized on social media by news outlets and extensively by the Universal Preschool Now campaign. Again, we haven't heard any single concerns from the public. Meanwhile, we've received hundreds of messages in support of expanding preschool access from both Universal Preschool Now and Preschool for All supporters, which is what this board is proposing. People are thrilled with the unification of our efforts. I've heard from dozens of people, from local organizations who have endorsed both measures to national organizations who want to see Multnomah County become this country's leader in ensuring quality, universal preschool for children. They're ready to work with us on a unified campaign to pass Preschool for All in November. I will say that having two separate measures is risky. It's much more complicated for voters, and it risks organized opposition. My biggest fear if we don't take this step today is that we will be putting at risk the success of universal preschool for children in Multnomah County. The Universal Preschool Now campaign team shared with the board their takeaways from their conversations with voters during the petitioning process in a letter sent on August 19th to us. And I'll quote from that letter. Overwhelmingly, the conversations consisted entirely of high-level motivating concepts: tuition-free and universal preschool, significant wage increases for childcare workers, and funding from a tax only on the wealthy. Because voters are almost never cared to delve into any of the details that would differ between the original Universal Preschool Now measure and the Preschool for All measure that has now been referred for November. We are confident that the current Preschool for All measure matches the intent of our 32,000 petition signers. That's why I am so proud to unify these campaigns and improve the likelihood that voters approve a universal preschool program. Arguments that this step subverts the initiative process doesn't hold water. Multnomah County is different. Our home rule charter gives us clear legal authority to take this step. I care deeply about our democratic process, and here in Oregon, that means the initiative system is part of that process. I would not want to see the initiative process abused, but what we're talking about today in no way does that. We have been asked by the chief petitioners and coalition members of Universal Preschool Now to take this step today via their testimony in emails and letters, and we'll hear it again from them today. I would guess that our situation today is unprecedented, even in Oregon history. We have a measure sent to the ballot in Preschool for All that fulfills the objectives of the UPN measure completely, and has also been carefully created to answer the call we're hearing loud and clear to invest deeply in Brown, Black, Indigenous, and all people of color communities to make systemic change. And we as a board have a path before us that allows this measure to go forward alone in response to the request from Universal Preschool Now. We could focus on what we're not doing today, how we're not referring a second measure to voters, but I think that would be a grave mistake. We should instead focus on what we are doing. We are referring to voters the single biggest anti-poverty initiative in Multnomah County in a generation. The Preschool for All measure, when fully implemented, will constitute an investment in our children more than 10 times larger than the Portland Children's Levy. It will positively impact children, families, employers, our school partners, teachers, preschool providers, and preschool workers, who are overwhelmingly women and disproportionately women of color. It will be an investment worthy of this historic moment when we prioritize investments in children and BIPOC communities who are most affected by the lack of affordable, high-quality preschool. There are different ways we can show up for these communities. On one hand, our tweets and memes and posters and selfies, but then there's process, partnership, action, and most importantly, investment in our children, investment in BIPOC communities. We need more of the latter, and that's the opportunity before us today. I hope you'll stand with me and the broad, diverse, unified coalition behind this single effort and support the motion to adopt the Universal Preschool Now ordinance today. I'd now like to introduce some members of the Universal Preschool Now Coalition who are here to speak in support of this measure. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are going to start. Commissioner Vega Peterson, who is first up on the list to speak this morning?
We have Sahar, who's here.
Good morning, Sahar. Welcome.
Good morning, commissioners. Thank you so much for having me. Hope you all are doing well. I want to thank you all for having me here. And I wanted to start off by saying that Suzanne is back to teaching. It's her first day back, and so she couldn't miss it. And Will is on vacation. And so I'm here representing our chief petitioners, but I wanted to assure you all that I am speaking for all of us, and they would definitely be here if it weren't for the circumstances. And I want to thank you all for taking this unusual step. I know we've had hours of conversation, and as we were just discussing, this is more of a complicated issue. And I do want to reiterate that what the Universal Preschool Now campaign and Preschool for All have now negotiated between the two coalitions really represents the strengths of each of them. And when we went out and got these signatures, we were really focusing on our main points, which were obviously a universal preschool measure, making sure that folks have living wages, making sure that negotiation and bargaining and all those things are available, and really focused on those points and making sure that it's culturally competent, play-based, all those things. And all those points have now come together with the two coalitions. And so I just want to reiterate that we are really excited to launch this final step. And we think that this measure definitely represents the strengths of both. And again, we want to make sure, as Commissioner Vega Peterson said, that we don't confuse voters. We want to make sure that we have making sure that we don't get a lot of opposition by botching the process or confusing voters, and really appreciate you all taking the time to solve this and realize that obviously this issue now with the two measures wasn't of your doing, but really appreciate that we are working on to make sure that we're not confusing voters and make sure that we have one measure going forward. And really, and I'm sure Emily and John have talked about this, and we mentioned in our letter, but really what was important for us was making sure that we're hitting those points that were important for our campaign. And we are seeing that now. And we have a whole lot of parents, organizers, preschool workers, union members, community groups, really excited and ready to go. We have the momentum, and we're just really eager to launch and make sure that we get the word out there and get this measure passed in a way that is as clear as possible for our voters. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to figure this out with us. Appreciate you all.
Thank you, Sahar. Thanks for coming this morning. I think Emily Von W. Gilbert. Emily, are you up next?
I am. Thank you so much.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, commissioners. Happy birthday, Commissioner Myron. My name is Emily Von W. Gilbert. I am one of the Up Now campaign's two coordinators, along with John Bethencourt, who will be speaking after me. I have mainly focused on the coalition side of things, so I wanted to share with you some of our coalition thinking behind getting to this point and how much we appreciate that this puts you in an awkward position, but we really want to make you feel reassured that we think this is the right decision. So I wanted to let you know As some of this was in the email, but I wanted you to hear from me too so that you can ask me questions. The formation of the Up Now campaign was formed around shared values, and those values were always universal free preschool for every child, fair wages for every preschool worker, starting at $18 an hour, and funded by an equitable marginal income tax on the wealthy. So in order to join the Up Now coalition, every organization agreed to these core principles, and those were the principles that formed the basis for the ordinance that we wrote and the public support that we built for that ordinance through the petition process. If you talk to anyone who's been even tangentially involved at any stage with this campaign, they will repeat these 3 core values to you with great enthusiasm. And because of the strength and simplicity of these 3 core values, our coalition's vote to merge with the negotiated Preschool for All proposal wasn't very complicated. These 3 core values are there, and because those are what we formed around and what we want to see happen in our community, we can clearly see that a single measure will bring about the absolutely best chance of succeeding at the ballot in November. And since announcing our decision to merge, the endorsement list has continued to grow, and we now have an amazing, undeniable coalition ready to put in the work to really get universal preschool passed at the ballot this November. I will say that as a grassroots all-volunteer effort, I'll admit that we did not carefully consider the procedural demands that our decision would place on the board. We really do understand and appreciate that you've been put in a difficult position and that you, as elected officials, are considering wider implications than just the fate of these 2 proposals. But I want to share our perspective from a campaign viewpoint here. What we are worried about is things like, okay, so if we don't get adopted today and we instead wait until next week for a vote to get referred, and excuse me if I'm being fuzzy on the details here, if we get referred and that doesn't happen until next week, and we have to have the voter pamphlet statements in by September 8th, that would give us 1 business day to collect all those from our whole coalition. And if we would be in a situation with 2 measures going to the ballot, our coalition feels strongly that in order to not risk a split vote, which is the great fear here, we would have to strongly advocate for a vote yes on both. And with just the turnaround of 1 business day, we're unsure that we could get there. So the outcomes of possibly having 2 measures on the ballot would be, of course, either 1 could pass or both could fail, very real risk, or both could pass. And in that case, the board would be put in the also unprecedented situation of having to reconcile the 2 measures into 1, which also wouldn't be exactly what the voters had voted for. So I really appreciate that this is a tricky situation, but I do think that the cleanest and simplest way to know what voters are going to want is to present them with the Preschool for All measure by adopting and doing this procedural process with the Universal Preschool Now measure. And I think that even though this is a difficult decision to make for several of you, I'm sure I just want you to know that we really want to thank you for anything that you feel able to do in order to move us all towards a win for preschool this November, because we think that this win would have impacts for generations to come, and it's very important that we get this right. So thank you all.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for joining us this morning. Next up, we have John Bethencourt.
John, I unmuted you. Let me try again. Okay, John, can you try speaking?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Thank
Good morning.
you, good morning, and thanks for having me here. I'm John Bethencourt, the other coordinator of the Universal Preschool Now campaign, along with Emily. As a follow-up to Emily's comments, I have a few thoughts to offer about my experiences gathering signatures for Universal Preschool Now. I personally gathered about 1,800 signatures on our petition, so I got a really broad sample of local opinions on this matter in the process. Now, as Emily explained, our coalition drafted an ordinance to accomplish 3 things: tuition-free and universal preschool for all kids, fair wages for preschool workers, and funding from an income tax on the wealthy. So when we collected the 32,000 signatures, we started conversations by asking voters whether they think preschool should be free for all 3 and 4-year-olds in Multnomah County. Many of them were surprised to learn that preschool is not already free, and virtually all believed it was completely obvious that it should be. Opposition to the idea was all but non-existent. Out of the 2,000 to 3,000 conversations I had that led to those signatures, the overwhelming majority of those who did not sign the petition could not because they were not registered to vote or lived outside the county. A small portion of voters asked how the program would be funded, sometimes expressing concern that their property taxes would go up. But upon learning that the funding would come not from property taxes, but from a tax on only high incomes, nearly all of those voters concerned about higher taxes came around and enthusiastically signed the petition. Detailed policy questions about the implementation of the program or the specifics of the tax structure were very rare. And I can only recall several, maybe around 3 or 4 individuals out of the thousands that I talked to who were truly opposed to this on policy grounds. Almost all the conversations consisted entirely of high-level motivating concepts: tuition-free and universal preschool, wage increases for childcare workers, and funding from a tax on the wealthy. Because very few voters cared to delve into any of the details that would differ between the original Universal Preschool Now measure and the Preschool for All measure that has now been referred for November, we are confident that that current Preschool for All measure matches the intent of our 32,000 petition signers. It is crucial that we do not confuse those voters by placing 2 preschool measures side by side on the November ballot, which would only invite some of them to try and express a preference by voting yes on one and no on the other, thereby splitting the vote and creating a very real risk of us snatching defeat from the jaws of victory on what has otherwise been a campaign with just overwhelming support. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Commissioner Vega-Peterson, are those the speakers for today's presentation? Great, thank you. Okay, now we will go through, and I want to thank everyone for coming this morning and apologize for the awkwardness of these virtual board meetings. As many times as we've done them, they don't seem to get any less clunky, but we wish we were all there in person. All right, we are going to go through and start questions and comments from commissioners, and we're going to start with Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. I had maybe some legal questions. Maybe I should have asked earlier if Jenny's still on the line, but I'm referring to a letter from Bennett Hartman, the attorneys representing UPN. And I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs. But in that letter, it says that the Oregon Constitution gives its citizens the right to initiate and enact law directly. It goes on to talk about sections. It says, well, this is a cherished and protected right in Oregon. It is often misunderstood. First, while many people talk about their right to have signature count, there is no such right. It goes cites some cases. Let's see. This is just because a person signs a petition does not guarantee that the signature will be submitted by chief petitioners, yet alone counted. So to the contrary, unless the initiative petition with signatures is submitted, chief petitioners control the process entirely. Even if they have enough signatures for a measure to qualify, they can decide not to submit it. This occurs occasionally with initiative petition drives prompting legislation enactment or being dropped because of other political needs. So, so Jenny, I just wanted to see, do you agree with what is in this letter?
Thank you, Commissioner. Jenny Magor, County Attorney. The portion of the letter that you read is a correct and accurate recitation of Oregon law as it pertains to initiative petitions and the rights of the chief petitioners.
Okay, great. The second paragraph says, second, a law enacted by initiative can be amended or repealed in the same manner as any law enacted by legislative body itself. And you agree with that as well?
Yes, I do, Commissioner. The board has
Okay.
authority to amend. Absolutely.
Okay, and then it goes on. I'm just kind of skipping around, but it's this. Sorry, there's a bug flying. In short, the Board of County Commissioners has full authority to adopt, amend, repeal an ordinance adopted or presented by initiative. And you agree with that as well?
Yes, especially in this case. If it was a different petition, there might be other limitations, but with regard to this particular tax, I absolutely agree.
Okay, great. Then it goes on to talk about number 2, application, and it's, I'll just skip to, let's see. It says, as a result, chief petitioners now support the county's referral. Stated differently, enactment of the Preschool for All initiative will achieve chief petitioners' key policy objectives, the same policy objectives that the 32,000 voters who signed petitions heard about from signature gatherers, thereby eliminating the need for a separate initiative. Let's see. Indeed, enactment of both initiatives, let's see, I'm reading this on my iPhone. It's a little challenging. So indeed, enactment of both initiatives, let's see. Okay, so basically, I mean, so I'm hearing kind of from the petitioners, which is very helpful. And then reading through this legal letter who represents them, it sounds like that we have legal agreement on both sides, and that in materially, the two measures are close enough, and even if they aren't from a legal standpoint, which I think they are, that the parties have agreed. So I just wanted to call that out, and also wanted to thank Sahar and Emily and John. I know that when I sign petitions, it's just like, it's a very high level, like, do you think there should be universal preschool? And it's kind of a yes or no. So I do agree with what the testimony that was given today, that it really is that voters, it was really based on an overall policy. And I think the combining of these achieves that. So thank you for answering the questions, Jenny.
So Commissioner Stegman, are you finished with questions?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Next, we're going to call on Commissioner Myron.
Hi, thank you, Chair.
I'm sorry, for questions and comments on the measure.
Oh, thank you. I was just prepared to ask just a very specific question, then go back to another order. But I had a two specific. So is this my time to question and comment in the whole? Okay.
Just a second, Commissioner Stegman, did you give your final wrap up? Do you have do you have comments?
I did not.
Okay, so this is
just questions now.
This is just questions now, and then we'll go through again and have everyone give their final comments. So yeah, this is just questions, and Commissioner Myron, this is your chance to ask your questions, and then we'll go on to Commissioner Jayapal.
Great, thank you. So I just had a letter to follow up, or a question to follow up on Commissioner Stegman's question about sort of the initiative process. That, you know, there's no such right that signatures will count. Just because you sign something doesn't mean that the initiative petition will be submitted. And until it's submitted, then the petitioners, of course, can do anything. They're the ones that are in charge of that petition. Is there a distinction after the petition is actually submitted? Like, why would they mention that until submit, you can do anything unless something changes after you submit? Who owns the petition after it is submitted with the verified signatures? Is a question I have.
Jenny Madcore, County Attorney. I can take a run at that question, Commissioner. I think that really what happens at that moment is a baton is passed to the Board of County Commissioners. And under Section 5 of our county code, you can either refer or adopt the measure.
Okay. And when we say, again, this is going to get down to the language that, that is so key here. I first want to take a step back and clarify, what are we seeking to do right now? We are seeking, I've heard about 5 different things just in the past week alone with different approaches. First, we were going to adopt and repeal, then we were going to adopt and amend, we were going to adopt and suspend, because the messaging with adopt and repeal sounded too harsh. There have been all kinds of conversations around what is in fact going to happen. I don't, to be honest, know what I'm voting on right now. Is it adopt and immediately repeal?
So I'll address that question with regard to the process that we're in right now, and then I will defer to one of the other board members to talk about future planning. So for process-wise right now, we are looking at adopting universal preschool. That takes 2 votes of the Board of County Commissioners. So today is the first reading. And then next week, if it passes this week, next week it will come back for a second reading and adoption. So that's the matter before you today. And I think I will defer to another, the chair or another commissioner to talk about what we expect to see on a subsequent board calendar regarding possible amendment, repeal, or otherwise.
Commissioner Vega Peterson, would you like to answer that question?
Sure, Chair, thank you. Yeah, so as I stated in my opening remarks, if this motion passes today and we have the second reading that also passes, then I'll put forward a motion to repeal the Universal Preschool Now measure on September 3rd. And as I stated, though, however, this is something that obviously would be a board decision, and so we can have the discussion then about, what that step looks like, but that is my plan for going forward.
Well, maybe since the board is here, we could have some of that discussion, because I feel like a lot of this is what is happening behind closed doors, and that changes, like I said, from day to day. Last I talked to you, Jessica, we had talked about suspending and amending. And so I'm literally surprised that we're now talking about repealing. And I want this process, we talk about a lot about the lofty goals of universal preschool, which is a value we all believe in. And so we're skirting over the process, but actually this process does matter. And I want to be sure that we are being as communicative and transparent about what we are trying to achieve as a board and why and how we're doing it, so the public understands that, because I right now don't understand that. So is the plan, and maybe other commissioners would want to deliberate and weigh in on this, do we intend to repeal as soon as this is adopted?
Okay, I'm just going to jump in real quick with this. Just as Commissioner Meyer, just as Jenny Madcourt just said, the vote right now, and the vote right now is about adopting the universal preschool measure. We can have a conversation about what comes next, but that is would be purely hypothetical at this point, as we don't. I mean, and you can weigh in on what your plans are. Commissioner Vega Peterson has said what her desire is at this moment for next week. I don't know that the paperwork has been submitted yet, so we don't have the language before us to look at. We will have that, I'm assuming, by tomorrow, since to put on the board calendar for the following week, it has to be ready tomorrow. So we're happy to weigh in on what perceived plans, what the perceived plans may be, but we don't have it in our hands at this moment.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that is one of the things that has been extremely challenging about this process, is this sort of behind the scenes happenings that there is, each thing seems to happen in silo, like when we referred Preschool for All, when I ask questions about what might happen with a second referral, it's like, oh, we're not talking about that at this meeting. Everything happens separate, and then suddenly we end up on September 3rd, we'll be voting on it. I'm not sure what, but maybe adopt and repeal. And we haven't gone through that process of getting there in all of our conversations about this. So that's the only thing I wanted to express that has really concerned me. And I think so that, I guess those are my two questions, such as they were. Thank you.
Thank you. So can we just clarify one more time, Commissioner Vega Peterson, what you're at this moment, what your plan, what you would like to see happen next week, subsequent of the vote today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, just to address Commissioner Myron's comments, I think that, it's difficult to, because there is a process, right, that we go through in terms of the different legislative steps that happen with the different pieces of this, and it has been complicated. I've tried to be able to answer as many questions as I can, and I know that a lot of that Jenny's also been able to answer questions, and there have been a part of this process has also been the conversations with Universal Preschool Now, and really making sure that we're having conversations with them. But I think for next week, putting forward as I just said a few minutes ago, like putting forward a motion to repeal the measure, it seems to me that does a couple of things. One, it really underscores the idea that we've heard today, and that we've heard that Preschool for All meets all the criteria of what was put forward with the petition, and that's something that we want to unify behind for voters in November. I also think it adds clarity to exactly what we're doing with our code. I've known in conversations with Jenny that she has said that once things are in our code, it becomes eligible for potential lawsuits. It becomes, potential for outside parties to come and bring suit against the legality of what's on the books. And so, to me, repeal seems the cleanest way of ensuring that doesn't happen. At the same time, making sure that there's a clear message in terms of what voters would be voting on and what would happen, to give certainty both to this board and to the public about what's happening.
Thank you. And next up for questions and comments, but we're going to hold the big comments until the end. Next up for questions, Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you, Chair. I have a comment and a question about process, and then a question for the petitioners as well. So in terms of the process, just want to address a couple of things that I think I heard in the conversation just now. One is the notion that there was a board plan about how this was going to go forward. I just want to clarify that as far as I've understood it, there has not been a board plan, certainly not one that I've been part of. As I understand it, Commissioner Vega Peterson has a motion on the table to adopt, and she intends to subsequently bring a motion to repeal. My question for, I think, Jenny is, to the extent that other commissioners have other ways that they'd like to proceed. For example, and I think, Commissioner Myron, to your point, I think it's clear that you would like to refer the Universal Preschool Now measure. I'm assuming, Jenny, that Commissioner Myron could notice and place a vote for referral on the agenda for next week.
That is correct.
Okay, great. So I guess from my perspective, I've heard what Commissioner Vega Peterson intends to do. I think there's still the option, as far as I understand it, and Jenny just confirmed, for another path to be put on the board agenda for the board to vote on. In terms of just one question for the petitioners, and I want to thank you, Sahar and John, for being here today, and Emily, and thank you for all the work you've put into this. I think you have already answered this question, but I just want to ask it again to be completely certain and to have it clearly on the record. You have said that you believe that the current preschool for all, I get my terminology, preschool for now, universal for all, preschool for all measure, in substance and principle is substantially similar to the universal preschool measure that you had been working on. My question is, what were the changes that were made to the preschool for all measure during this process? And if you could just talk about why you feel that those changes now make preschool for all a measure that is substantially similar in principle and policy objectives to the universal preschool now measure.
I don't know if that was directed at any specific person, but I'm happy to answer.
Any of you, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, if you would answer that question, that would be great. Thanks.
Sure. Yes. So first step was the universality. The Preschool for All plan initially had universality as a goal, a two-step process where there would be this initial step of the smaller plan, and then a subsequent election would be required to get to universal. And so we were able to agree that setting the goal of universal in this first step, so that there would be no need for a second election to arrive at that, was enough to satisfy our objective of the universal free preschool for every child. And then on the wages, we had the way we've been talking about wage floor of $18 an hour. We very much use that, as you've heard, the way we've been building public support for this is through conversations. And so for us, $18 an hour has to be $18 now when we're talking about it. And even though the Preschool for All measure said $18, it was $18 by the time the rollout happened. And we were able to agree that it makes more sense for voters to know that if they say 18, it's 18 as we perceive it today, not at some future point. So that satisfied our wages requirement. And then the last big sort of top level thing was the revenue mechanism, which the Preschool for All had not started working on until fairly late compared to how we did it, where we basically started with a revenue mechanism and then did everything else. So I don't think that they had objections to the revenue mechanism specifically, but they were in the process of writing the policy and polling on different options. So once they had their polling done and saw that had strong support, then they were happy to have a very similar revenue mechanism to what we did. And that was the basic extent of the negotiation.
So the three key points were wages, universality, and a definite mechanism to get to generating enough revenue to get to universality, and in general, a revenue mechanism that was focused on higher income earners.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Are those all of your questions?
That's for me, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. And I'm going to allow Commissioner Vega Peterson to ask any questions. I'm assuming that you don't have any, but to be fair, do you have questions for Jenny or for the speakers or yourself?
I don't have questions. I just want to give Emily, Sahar, even Will and Suzanne, who aren't here today, and John, just a huge thank you for their partnership and their time in the hours and hours of conversations that we've had to get here today. It's been really great working with them, and I really appreciate them being here today.
Thank you. All right. Do any commissioners have any last questions before we head into speeches, before we head into our voting? Okay, we're going to go through and have our ending speeches, and we're going to start with Commissioner Myron.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, in response to what Commissioner Jayapal had mentioned about process, I do want to confirm, and this was the time to discuss this, I do want to confirm that I do intend to notice and place on the agenda for our next board meeting a vote for referral of the Universal Preschool Now measure. So I do intend to do that, to put that option on the table. So we have all of the options available to us. And so that's just there in terms of process. In general, I too want to deeply thank Sahar and Emily and John for being here and for your comments and all the work that you have done for so long, striving for universal preschool. I don't think any of us disagree at all about the value of universal preschool and how much we all believe in this and what a game changer it can be. And we have dedicated many briefings and board sessions specifically to the value of universal preschool and the two measures that have come before us. Well, mainly preschool for all. But this is the only time really that we've actually dedicated specifically to process. And so that's what I want to speak about, because as it turns out, process actually does matter. I wish, as I've said before, I wish Preschool for All and Universal Preschool Now had agreed upon a unified proposal prior to submission of the Up Now measure. To be honest, and I've said this before, I don't understand why it did not happen in the years that they were working on these measures in parallel. There were so many ways to come to a compromise, to unify, to pursue this together. And I wish any of those had happened, except the idea of adopting and potentially repealing, because that to me is just not acceptable. The fact that this unification didn't happen prior to submission of the initiative position leaves this board in a difficult position, which we have all described. I feel that it really boils down to political theater and what I believe is a sleight of hand to try to get around a situation no one wanted to be in, two potentially competing ballot measures around a single issue that everyone on this board actually supports. In this age of Trump, especially, process matters more than ever. Using the means of government to achieve its own ends, or saying that the ends justify the means of how we get there is not okay, even if the ends are exemplary, as they are here. The ends don't justify the means. And I am deeply distressed that the plan to get to a single preschool measure would require this board to maneuver the initiative petition system in a new way that is questionable. I still have questions as to the actual legality, but at the very least in regard to the spirit of the law. I don't say just because we can through a manipulation and maybe through the wording that we should do something, because it's very clear in the code what we can do. We have two options when initiative petitioners submit verified signatures in support of referring a message to the voters. Those options are refer the measure to the voters or enact the measure immediately. So let's be clear, the process that we're doing, we are saying today, yes, we are voting on enacting the measure, but what the intent with it all is, and what I believe may happen potentially next week, is literally the opposite. We are pretending to adopt the measure and then sweeping it away. There are arguments against the fact that, well, these in principle are the same, or the chief petitioners agreed, or technically it's legal, or the board can do whatever it wants, or we don't want to confuse the voters. There are arguments against all of those, but even if there weren't, they're irrelevant. The bottom line remains, by adopting and substituting our will as the board for the will of the voters, that does subvert the initiative process and, in fact, the democratic process. And I cannot agree to that. It's clear we can refer, and like I said, I intend to put up a vote for referral. It's unfortunate that this is what has come before the board out of two measures which arose from very similar values, wanted engagement, are seeking the same thing, the same in principle thing. But they didn't do it before the signatures were submitted. The initiative petition has in fact been submitted. We have two choices, and getting rid of the one that got submitted is not one of those choices. If we are voting to enact, we should be voting to enact. And I will not be party to the sleight of hand and not doing that. So I will be voting against the adoption today. And I really appreciate all the work everyone has done. I am very distressed about this vote. I did not want to be here. I so support all of the advocates and community members and all the people who have reached out to me about this. But this actually, at this point, does boil down to our process. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Myron. Commissioner Jayapal?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you again to everybody who's worked on this and who is here today. And I'm not saying anything new, but we all need to say it ourselves. This has been a messy process, and it has been a far messier process than any of us, including the petitioners, they've said it as well, would have wanted. It has been a difficult process to work through and to think about and analyze, and I've spent quite some time doing all of those things. But, in terms of the messiness of the process, I'm going to say some now very famous words. It is what it is. And given that it is what it is, I will be supporting adoption of UP Now and subsequent repeal of it so as to send one unified measure to the voters. I want to respond to Commissioner Myron's comments, and I appreciate her concerns, and I've really weighed those concerns very seriously as well. I don't view this as a sleight of hand. I view it as this board acting with the authority that we have, that we all know that we have, to legislate. And with the authority to legislate also comes the responsibility to legislate and to consider what we believe the best path forward is for our community. And that's what I keep in mind as I make my decision. I'm guided by three principal factors. The first is that our system of initiative petitions gives complete authority to the chief petitioners. They craft the ballot measure, they advocate for it, they collect the signatures that are required in order for it to be referred or adopted. They can choose to change the details of the measure. They can choose to stop collecting signatures at any point. They can choose not to submit the ballot measure even after collecting all the required signatures. In other words, the chief petitioners here could have collected all 32,000, and I think it was actually in an incredible feat during COVID, more than 32,000 signatures, then reached agreement on merging with Preschool for All and decided not to submit UP Now for certification. Chief petitioners are representing that the Unified Preschool for Now measure is substantially similar in policy terms to the Universal Preschool Now measure, and that it includes the elements most important to that measure and to the campaign. Those elements include tuition-free universal preschool, significant wage increases for childcare workers, and funding from a tax on higher income earners. And they're asking us to keep just that one unified measure on the ballot. The second factor is that if there's one thing we all in this virtual room agree on, it's that free, high-quality preschool is critically important to the futures of our children. Among other things, the evidence shows that kids who enter preschool programs are less likely to be arrested, more likely to graduate, and less likely to struggle with substance abuse as adults. Preschool is important for all children, but it's particularly important for children of color, immigrant and refugee children, children who speak English as a second language, and children with disabilities. Children who face barriers to success in life that we as a society place in front of them. Children who in Multnomah County do not currently have access to high quality, affordable preschool. So all of us in this virtual room agree on the importance of preschool, and as council has advised us, this board could have simply adopted the PFA measure as law. But the campaigns asked us to put it on the ballot, and I believe it was important to put it up to a vote because it is important to know, especially during these difficult economic times, whether voters agree that universal preschool matters enough that they're willing to pay for it. Sending one unified measure to the ballot accomplishes that objective. There has been concern expressed that not referring the Universal Preschool Now measure would be contrary to the intent of the 32,000 people who signed the UP Now petition. And I note that they're not voters, they're signatories. They could sign the petition and subsequently vote not against the measure. I believe that by putting the Preschool for Now proposal before the voters, we would be honoring the wishes of the signatories to the petition. Chief petitioners have told us that the messaging around the UP Now campaign was about the broad policy goals of the measure, goals that are accomplished by the Preschool for All measure. They've told us that very few, if any, signatories asked about the details of the implementation framework or the tax structure. And they've assured us that they believe that referring a single unified measure to the ballot will satisfy the intent of the signatories and uphold the integrity of the initiative petition process. Other supporters of the UP Now measure have expressed similar views. I quote from just one of the emails I've received. The writer says, quote, "I think that this merged Preschool for All plan does truly represent the will of the 32,192 signatures we collected, 300 of which I collected myself with my kids at my feet. I had many, many conversations about this with voters. The UP Now signatories were signing to vote for a plan that was truly universal and guaranteed a fair wage. This plan does that and more." As I pointed out before, our initiative petition process is designed so that the chief petitioners are the driver and the engine of the process. And therefore, those assurances and their desire for a single measure are a critical factor in my decision-making. The third and final factor I considered is something that's often referred to as an equity lens. That means a lot of different things in different contexts, but as I'm using it here, it means asking who's helped and who's hurt by each available choice. Putting two measures on the ballot would likely decrease the chance of either measure passing. Putting one unified measure on the ballot maximizes the chances of the measure passing. I believe a universal preschool program helps all of us, helps our entire community by giving all of our children the best shot at the future we want for them. But it most immediately and most directly helps our Black and Brown children, our children who experience poverty, our immigrant and refugee children. At a time when the dual pandemics of racism and COVID have highlighted the deep inequities faced by our BIPOC communities, this is, for me, decisive. Deciding not to refer the UP measure, of course, does not conclude this process. The question remains of what to do with it once adopted. We're not voting on that question today, but as I said earlier, I do want to state my opinion that it should be repealed. One of the other options that had been under consideration and had been discussed was suspension. The only reason to suspend rather than repeal the measure, as far as I can see, would be to leave open a path for adopting it, even if voters reject the unified Preschool for All measure. That, in my mind, would be trying to have our collective cake and eat it too. I'm agreeing to a process that results in PFA being the only measure on the ballot because both coalitions have represented, and I believe, that it is a genuine synthesis of the two proposals. In that case, I don't believe it would be appropriate to immediately go back out with another substantially similar proposal. That would be, if the first were rejected, that would be acting against the express will of the voters. So I just want to thank again everyone who has worked so hard and continues to work so hard to make the vision of free, high-quality, universal preschool a reality. I continue to be motivated by the words and the faces of the parents that I have spoken to and heard from, particularly the parents of Black and Brown and immigrant children, for whom that vision has been so important and until now so distant. Thank you, parents, for your engagement, your commitment to our children and our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Vega Peterson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to start off by saying thank you to everyone who, who testified today, but just also thank you to this board. I know that this process has not been easy, and it's been a long process. We've been dealing with this for weeks. On top of so many other things that we're dealing with, as Commissioner Jayapal said, the twin pandemics of COVID and racism that have been happening. But we've heard a lot about process today and doing things that haven't been done before. This is a huge opportunity for our community. It is a once in a decade opportunity to invest in children and families. And I have to say, this is part of a long line of work that I've committed to doing to strengthen working families and to give those marginalized in our economic system, women, immigrants, people of color, a stronger voice. There have been a lot of things that haven't been done before that I've worked on both as a legislator and a commissioner, including paid sick leave, a higher minimum wage, and pay equity. And I can tell you the processes for getting those bills passed were not at all pretty or straightforward. It takes a lot of work to get big change done. But today we have that opportunity. Today we have the opportunity to have a clear and direct path towards referring the single measure and having voters give us the clear message on what they want us to support. And I think that is the most important thing that we can do today. We are doing something that we have heard time and time again from our attorney that is a legal step forward, and that we have the clear authority, a fundamental authority of this board to take on this work and to make this decision today. And that's something that, while the politics, they call it sausage making sometimes, but it's a process that we're going through that will change lives for the better, and that's really what's on the line. We heard once again today a strong desire to unite behind a single preschool measure. We're doing so at the behest of the chief petitioners and the Universal Preschool Now Coalition. We're also doing so at the behest of the Preschool for All Coalition, which comprises 36 community organizations and countless individuals. And most importantly, we're doing so in order to reduce the confusion and increase the likelihood that voters approve a monumental investment in our children. And for me, that is motivation enough, and I will be voting yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. There's been a lot of talk about process, and it brings to mind a graphic that I've seen, which I believe in, and it talks about valuing people over process. And I want to be very clear. I understand that this has been a messy and hard process, but nobody ever said it was going to be easy. And I think that that's a good indication that we're on the right track. And also, let me be very clear, in my opinion, there has not been manipulation. There has not been pretense. We are well within our legal right to move forward in whichever direction we choose to as a board. But I want to be very clear that I support Preschool for All. I support putting forth a single measure. And I just want to be transparent about that. Multnomah County, we have always led the way, whether you talk about tobacco, houselessness, criminal justice reform. I have no problem with us leading the way, and we know how to do that. We have the authority, and I think it's incredibly important that we give Preschool for All a fair shot. And the only way we can do that is by having one measure. And I think that if we really want to address the multiple crises that's going on in our country with the pandemic and the civil rights movement that we're in, is that we have to address the institutional racism that exists within our country and our county. And that it is time, well past time, that we have to embrace one another and accept one another without hate, without violence. And the only way that we can do that is through policies. That the outcome of Preschool for All will put so many children and families on a level playing field. Not only will it improve the outcomes and lives for Black and Brown children, but it will improve the lives for white children as well. To me, this is about dismantling racist policies and replacing them with anti-racist policies. And this Preschool for All measure does just that. I intend to support it 100%. And I want to thank Commissioner Vega Peterson and all of the community organizations. I know this has been a 2-year lift, but I fully support the efforts. And I really believe that this is the greatest good that we can do for not only our children, but our communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stegman. Several weeks ago, my colleagues and I heard from a panel of parents, advocates, and educators about the state of preschool and childcare in Multnomah County and in Oregon. And what we heard, and what we largely knew, is that it is dire. And of course, the harms of a broken preschool and childcare infrastructure fall heaviest on the backs of working families, especially low and middle income households, many of whom are families of color. Our patchwork system makes it incredibly difficult for families to build stability or to gain financial traction, either because of the actual cost of sending a child to preschool or the opportunity costs that come with being unable to afford it. On the other hand, we're all aware of just how life-changing that access to a high-quality early education can be for children in Multnomah County. The children who need it most and have the least access would finally be able to reap the lifelong benefits that prepare them to be successful in elementary school. Families would have one of their heaviest financial burdens lifted, and fewer parents would face the impossible and unfair choice between working and staying at home to take care of children. Preschool has been called the great equalizer, and it's clear why. During a time when our community is more willing than ever to confront the disproportionate harms of systemic racism and economic inequality, ensuring access to affordable, dependable preschool is a tangible step we can take to counter the harmful effects of generational and systemic inequalities that have kept opportunity out of reach for so many. I've said this so many times since this work began, and I'll say it again now. A properly publicly funded preschool program in Multnomah County would be utterly transformative. And that's why it's so important that we get this right. And that includes both the outcome in November and the process that precedes it. We are all in agreement on what is the right outcome for our community: a robust, accessible, and equitable preschool system. The support for that goal is deep, broad, and loud. The energy of the countless parents, advocates, educators, community organizations, and other stakeholders who have been involved in either campaign has made that clear. I would have loved to have seen an all-out early effort to bring this split constituency together, bound by their focus on the same end goal, so that they could have created a single measure that presents a clear path toward a publicly funded preschool system, backed by a block of voters greater than either lone measure could corral on its own. But as soon as that window of opportunity closed, the road to achieving this goal has gotten complicated, to put it graciously. The attempt to marry the Preschool for All measure, the result of more than 2 years of hard work, planning, and engagement, with the Universal Preschool Now measure, which more than 32,000 county voters signed on to supporting, is an admirable effort to find a middle road that honors the common goal of both measures. But the procedural mechanics to make the amended Preschool for All initiative the lone preschool measure on November's ballot are fraught. Today's vote is not actually a vote to adopt the Universal Preschool Now measure and ultimately repeal or adopt and amend and save as Plan B, a measure that was backed by tens of thousands of residents. As we heard in today's briefing, this path is technically permissible within the laws governing citizen initiatives in Multnomah County. But to me, it's clear that a plan to adopt a measure only to immediately suspend it or repeal it doesn't follow the spirit of those laws. Every member of this board, all of us working moms, knows what the right thing is for our community. high quality preschool accessible to every child. But we've been tasked with voting in accordance with what we each believe looks like the right way to achieve that right thing. What's allowed according to the letter of the law is only part of the picture. As a public official and as the chair of Multnomah County, my job is to serve the people. In the situation before us today, I believe acting in line with the spirit of the law upholds the will of the people and better protects the integrity of the initiative process. 32,000 Multnomah County voters asked for a public debate on the ballot by signing on to the Universal Preschool Now petition. I believe honoring their request to refer this measure is the best way, the right way, not just to serve our constituents now, but to serve them in the future, even if it means ultimately having two measures on the ballot this fall. Referring the UPN measure to the ballot, I think, would preempt potential criticisms anyone seeking to cast a cloud or caveat over a future preschool program or even upend it could lob. And by not setting a new procedural precedent today, we would be mitigating the chances that future measures could come under similar scrutiny. To make clear that this is the pathway that I intend to pursue today, I will vote no. The interpretation of the law clearly gives latitude, wide latitude on how we can legally proceed. However, I am deeply concerned that the board's approval of this maneuver tacitly endorses a procedural tool that can be used by future commissioners to undermine the will of the people. I understand that that is not the intent of any yes vote today, but it is also a legitimate consideration, a consideration that significantly influences my vote today. I understand that I am the minority of the commission on this matter, and I understand that my no vote will not affect the outcome of this vote, but I cannot in clear conscience vote yes today while I have concerns about the precedent that this sets. Marina, would you please take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Myron?
No.
Commissioner Jayapal?
Aye.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson?
Aye.
Commissioner Stegman?
Aye.
Chair Kafoury?
No. The first reading is approved, and the second reading is scheduled for Thursday, September 3rd, 2020. Now we've come to the time for board comments on any non-agenda items that you may have. I'm going to call on commissioners by district to see who has any items for discussion today. We're going to start with Commissioner Stegman.
Nothing. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, mute. Commissioner Vega-Peterson.
Nothing for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to mention to anyone listening or watching that I'm having a virtual constituent, we call them constituent coffees, but I think it's a virtual constituent event tomorrow at 2. If you're interested in joining, you can find the links on Facebook or Twitter.
Good luck. Hopefully a lot of people will turn out. And Commissioner Birthday Woman Myra.
Thank you. I don't have anything. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't have anything either. So that concludes today's regular board meeting. We will see you again Tuesday, September the 1st for a board briefing, and then again Thursday, September 3rd for our next board meeting. There being no further business, we are adjourned.